Oh, good morning, everyone, and welcome to day 2 of our virtual conference. We hope that you enjoyed our presentations yesterday, and our first presentation today will be given by Heidi Bernhardt, the founder of CADDAC. Heidi is a psychiatric nurse by training and mother of 3 young men with ADHD, and the founder and former executive director of the Center for ADHD Awareness Canada, CADDAC. And Heidi also served as the executive director of the Canadian ADHD Resource Alliance, CADDAC, a national not-for-profit organization of the leading clinicians and researchers on ADHD in Canada for the 6 years. And over the past 28 years, Heidi has helped raise awareness and understanding of ADHD among parents, educators, healthcare professionals, and industry leaders and government officials through presentations, conferences, media interviews, and advocacy work. Today for this session, Heidi will be presenting on tips for understanding the ADHD mind and navigating on adult ADHD relationship when you don't have ADHD. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please enter them into the chat box and they will be answered at the end of the presentation. And Heidi, I'll pass the time to you now. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fiona. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Understanding and Successfully Navigating an ADHD Relationship When You Don't Have ADHD. So this presentation is geared more to the spouses, significant others of those with ADHD, but I'm sure we'll be joined by some couples as well. So just a really quick sort of intro or disclaimer. I've been married for 46 years to a spouse with ADHD. I have 3 grown sons, actually they're not that young anymore. They're in their 30s and early 40s, 2 of which are married. So sort of been there, done that, a lot of this, but I must admit that even after working in the field of ADHD for many, many years, I'm still learning. ADHD is a very complex disorder that affects all nuances of somebody's life and presents in so many different ways. So as I go through this material, realize that not everything we discuss about ADHD in general or impairments will show up in everyone. ADHD is a very individualized disorder, and that is part of the big challenge in understanding your significant other with ADHD. So I am just going to stop my video now so I can actually, if I can get controls back, so I can see my slides. All right, so here we go. Okay, so Fiona, when I stop my video, I cannot forward my slides, so I will start my video again. And sorry, apologies to everyone that, okay, actually my slides are not progressing that way.
We see your slides.
Interesting. So the only way I can do it is by scrolling. The arrow won't do it. Okay, I guess I'll just have to scroll. Okay, so sorry about that. So the topics we're going to be talking about, and I'll just let you know right now, there's a lot of content in this presentation. There's a lot of slides. I write my slides very detailed because I've received so many requests that people be able to read the slides after the fact and still understand the content, because a lot of people go back and refer to the material, to the links to different resources, to the citations. So some of them I may go through a little bit quickly just because of time, but you are going to have the slides. And if we don't have much time for questions at the end, don't be concerned. You can always email me through the CADDAC website. They will forward the emails to me, and we can have a brief Q&A that way as well. So we're going to talk about generally understanding ADHD and the impairments it can cause and how those impairments can impact a relationship. We're going to be talking about the dynamics of an ADHD relationships, different stages of a relationship. We're going to talk about how to begin to improve your relationships and different steps for that. We're going to be talking about a couple of typical roadblocks people hit in this process. And then we're going to be talking about applying specific strategies. Okay, so let's start with step one, understanding ADHD symptoms and presentations. So as I mentioned, ADHD can present in very different ways in different people, okay? That is a very important thing to understand and know, because again, we talked about ADHD in generalities. One tip to you while you're learning about ADHD, and this is the most important first thing you need to do, is learn about ADHD. Try to remove your emotions about it. And listen, after being in a relationship where there's ADHD, there's a lot of triggers, buttons, emotions involved. So try at the beginning to be a bit academic, clinical, just learn about ADHD in general. And then for the next step, try to understand how ADHD impacts your partner specifically, okay? That will help you to be able to later put in specific strategies and accommodations to help with specific impairments. Some tips for being able to do this, if you're involved in the diagnostic procedure, which you should be because significant others should be given forms to be able to fill out rating scales. That will cue you to where some of the more important impairments or ADHD symptoms are showing up. If possible, you may want to join some of the medical appointments so you can be part of that process or hear what's being said. And then CADDAC has a lot of resources that will help. We have webinars, we have YouTube film educational presentations from past conferences from Dr. Barkley, Dr. Brown. There's a lot of text information about adult ADHD. So those are lots of resources. And of course, there's always stuff online, but be careful that they're reputable resources. So let's quickly look at some ADHD impairments or symptoms that can affect a relationship. Obviously, attention dysregulation comes into play. You need to know that those with ADHD overfocus as much as they underfocus or lose their focus, can't keep their focus. So if the person with ADHD is very interested in something, finds it very involving, they can overfocus or hyperfocus, which means they can't switch their focus or tune out. If you're trying to have a conversation while this is happening, it's not going to work. So that's something to be very conscious of, okay? They're unable to switch their focus when they're in this hyper-focusing mode. So therefore, they have difficulty with what we call prioritizing their focus, which means being focused on the thing that's most important rather than most interesting. That's very difficult for people with ADHD. And then we see this being easily bored. So again, follows with the things that are interesting and stimulating, catch their attention. The things that are mundane and boring don't. They frequently have difficulty with distraction, both external and internal. So what do we mean by that? External distraction is noise, someone speaking, someone walking by, telephone ringing, anything that is outside of the person. Internal distractions is that daydreamy, wandering mind, right? So internal thoughts can be very distracting for adults with ADHD as well. And they can spend a lot of time in their mind thinking and daydreaming. Obviously, hyperactivity, restless body and mind. A lot of adults I've spoken to talk about continually having a restless mind where they can't shut it down to relax. Their mind is always thinking of numerous things. So this can also impact a relationship, of course, if you want your partner just to spend some relaxing time with you. The impulsivity comes out in speech, in actions, impulsive spending, all kinds of different ways for different people. And unfortunately, for people who don't understand ADHD, this is often misinterpreted as being the person is being uncaring and irresponsible, when that is not their intent at all. But again, impulsivity can be a core symptom of ADHD for many. And then we look at executive functioning impairments, difficulty with organizational skills, which impact things like household duties, paying bills, losing their belongings, messiness, to the point where for some people it can actually turn into hoarding. The inability to follow instructions or directions, especially if they're numerous ones stringed together, can be a problem. Adults as well, of course, when I talk about these symptoms, they go through the lifespan. So if you have children with ADHD, many of these things may ring a bell as well, because of course we see them, these symptoms and impairments in children and adolescents as well. So difficulty sequencing steps to something that needs to be done, and keeping those steps in the proper order can be a problem. And remembering lists of things, duties, all that kind of stuff is a problem. Forgetting routines, appointments, promises. And again, unfortunately, this leads other people to think of adults with ADHD as being unreliable, when again, that is not the intent of the adult. Following rules, being consistent is a problem, especially as it impacts parenting. And we're going to be talking about this in more detail later. Time management, always being late, missing deadlines, lack of schedule, or if there is a schedule, not keeping to the schedule are things we see. And difficulty with social skills can be quite an issue for some people. Adults with ADHD and children and adolescents as well have difficulty picking up subtle signals. So if you're expecting your partner to figure out what that frown means on your face without being direct and telling them, it's not going to work. We need more direct communication. So emotional dysregulation is something that is not listed in the 3 core symptoms of DSM, but especially in the last decade or two, it has very much come to the forefront as being one of the core symptoms of ADHD. And emotional dysregulation is fueled or comes about because of issues with self-regulation. And very often the adult is unaware of why they are easy to anger, frustrated more easy, etc., right? So as I said, adults can be more easily frustrated, but the thing is that when they are frustrated, it is much more difficult for them to react or show their frustration in appropriate ways, or to be constructive in the ways they show it and then deal with that frustration. Some adults can become easy to anger. They can become unintentionally aggressive. So people with ADHD have difficulty modulating their voice level. So when excited, they can become very loud. They can sometimes have that looming presence because they were very, very involved in what they're saying and trying to bring their point across. And they can be very persistent, so not let things go, which can be very distressing sometimes in a relationship or discussion. They may be totally unaware that they're speaking loudly or being scary. And again, this is one of the reasons we need this direct communication. And sometimes we also see meltdowns occur. I'm hearing a lot of background noise. I'm not sure why that's happening or if everybody's hearing that, but just a FYI to somebody who may not have turned their sound down. Anyway, okay, and this issue with meltdowns can lead to the non-ADHD partner, and excuse me for referring to people as the ADHD partner, the non-ADHD partner, the adult with ADHD, but it does simplify being able to discuss this. So the non-ADHD partner can feel like they're walking on eggshells because they're never quite sure where this inappropriate ways of showing frustration is going to come out, when a meltdown is going to occur. They're always worried about, you know, setting off that last thing, the last straw that breaks the camel's back that's going to set off an emotional, unregulated incident. Okay, so, and emotional dysregulation can be very destructive to a relationship, so it's something we have to be very aware of. So another issue is what we call self-medicating with argument. And this is something that's relatively new being discussed. There's a couple of links there if you're interested in more detailed information from Dr. Amen and Gina Pira. But basically, the theory goes that the ADHD brain craves stimulation. So because of this, some people with ADHD provoke arguments or situations of drama. Usually it's unconscious, but it's done to increase adrenaline, okay? So anger, upset, negativity, opposition causes this immediate adrenaline surge in the brain, which has a very stimulating effect on the brain. So adrenaline helps to provide focus and calm to the ADHD brain, okay? And because this dysfunctional pattern is rewarding, again, this is generally set up unconsciously, right? It gets reinforced over time. And we can see this sort of argumentative, conflict-seeking behavior type of issues, behavior happening anywhere and with anyone, but we know we let our guard down the most with loved ones. So we tend to see this a lot within families as well. And what happens, we see the same dynamic in children as well. If the ADHD partner tries to just walk away, ignore the behavior may be escalated, right? To actually still get that adrenaline surge, right? So because of that, everybody has to be made aware of what's going on to be able to deal with it. So again, another trait of some adults with ADHD is to have a personality trait of being a worrier, being very anxious, or a perfectionist. Okay, so 25 to 40% of adults with ADHD have anxiety. Worry is more targeted to a specific issue. Anxiety is more generalized. But again, it's something that helps the ADHD brain seek focus. And Dr. Hallowell talks about worry and anxiety providing a riveting focus for the brain, similar to pain, okay? And he also mentions that, you know, when you're very calm and just having a quiet, good day, there's nowhere for the ADHD brain to focus. But if you've got something to worry about, the ADHD can gnaw at it all day long, and it gives it a place to focus. And also with perfectionism, some adults with ADHD get stuck on details. They have a view of what the perfect finished product looks like. And that is their goal, to obtain that. And the sort of thought of good enough is not there. It has to be perfect or it's not good enough. So they get stuck in constantly striving for this perfection, or they may even get stuck in just constantly thinking about how to do something before they even start it. So they're in this rut where they just keep, thinking about best way to do it, everything that can go wrong, and they just go on and on in their brain. But again, this is something that helps focus the brain. And of course, emotional dysregulation makes these things even worse. So let's go on to step 2 and look at understanding the dynamics of the ADHD relationship. So this is a quote from Melissa Orloff, who is a marriage therapist specializing in ADHD that I like. I like this quote very much. It says, ADHD symptoms alone aren't destructive to a relationship. It's a partner's response to those symptoms or impairments and the reaction that it evokes. So it's both the interpretation and the reaction of what's happening that becomes disruptive in the relationship. So through this interpretation, it's a communication pattern that occurs. So the cycle is the non-ADHD partner becomes frustrated, angry about something that's happened or not happened, a certain behavior, something that's been forgotten, etc. Blame is laid, there's anger, and then of course they withdraw from the relationship. The ADHD partner, obviously, when they're criticized or blamed, they become defensive, they downplay the severity of what they're doing, they accuse their partner of making too much of it, so they're excusing the behavior, they're denying it, and they also withdraw from the relationship. So we start to see how the relationship starts to break down. And it's interesting when we look at stages of a relationship. So when there's ADHD involved. So very often in a new relationship, the partner who has ADHD becomes very focused on the relationship and their new partner. This is novel, it's something very exciting and stimulating, and they give their new partner a lot of attention, and the new partner feels very special. As the relationship evolves and the cycle develops, that hyperfocus stops because we can't keep that level of focus and excitement for a lengthy period of time. This causes confusion and hurt in the new partner. They don't know what's going on, why this person has changed, and the impairments start to become evident. Okay, they're starting to see reaction to frustration, missed appointments, et cetera, et cetera. And they start to interpret what's happening as that new partner being uncaring and unreliable. And then if parenting begins, we start to see even more problems. So the ADHD partner, the adult who has ADHD, also becomes confused because their new partner, who was so excited about how impulsive they were and such an exciting person, all of a sudden is nagging at them, and they feel nitpicking. They become defensive and angry. And eventually if the cycle keeps going and going and going, and nobody understands ADHD or what's going on, the relationship eventually breaks down more and more. And I can't tell you the number of adults I've spoken to who have said, if only I knew back then about my ADHD or about my partner's ADHD, things might have been different and we might not be divorced right now. So let's look a little bit more into the feelings of the non-ADHD partner, or the person who does not have ADHD. So as this cycle progresses, they start feeling more ignored, more lonely, more unloved. Remember, the adult with ADHD can become very hyper-focused on things outside of the relationship. that does not involve their partner, and their partner doesn't understand what's going on. They start to feel they can't trust or rely on their partner. They start to feel their partner doesn't care enough. They don't love them enough. And they feel unheard and discounted because they're constantly bringing up the issues they see in the relationship, the ways the person's being unreliable in their mind, uncaring, and nothing ever seems to change, even though the partner may be promising that it will. Okay, they can feel unfairly saddled with being the responsible one, taking the full load of parental duties, household chores. The feelings of anger and resentment keep building up. Stress levels keep building up. Exhaustion builds up because they feel like they're carrying the entire load. And then we have that feeling of walking on eggshells constantly to avoid emotional outbursts, which can be exhausting in itself. So, but then on the other side, we have the feelings of the partner with ADHD. So they start to feel that their partner's constantly trying to micromanage their life. They've become a control freak, right? They're constantly nagging at them, and they don't understand where this is coming from. Because understand that adults with ADHD have very little insight on how their behavior impacts others. This is just a part of ADHD. We see it in children, adolescents, all through the lifespan. So unless some education is put in there, and some type of therapy training knowledge, there's little insight going on. Okay. So the adult with ADHD doesn't know where all this negativity is coming from. They start avoiding their partner or just saying what they think their partner wants to hear, but things don't change. But also realize they may be more hypersensitive to criticism due to the excess criticism they've received in early years. And we know that children and adolescents get far, far more criticism in their life than kids without ADHD. So they start to feel continually and unfairly judged and misunderstood. And again, this is from their viewpoint, right? So they may become resentful, totally tune out to criticism because they feel like that's all they're ever getting. They may feel overwhelmed, and they start to anticipate failure. They start to feel that no matter what they do and how hard they try, they're never going to be able to meet their partner's expectations, because remember, these underlying impairments keep tripping them up, so they just stop trying. They start to feel shame, less than a partner, a child in the relationship, unloved and unwanted. And like everybody else, they just want to be accepted, loved, appreciated. So now we've gone through all the bad things. Let's look about how to begin and improve your relationship. So first step, ADHD needs to be assessed, or the adult with ADHD needs to go for a full medical assessment, because not only do we want to diagnose the ADHD, if it's there, of course, we want to also look for other potential coexisting disorders. 80% of adults have something else going on, like anxiety, depression, OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, sometimes substance abuse, alcohol abuse. So we need to get a full picture of what is going on with that adult, because we have to be able to deal and treat with everything. Treatment has to be put in place. We're going to talk about the treatments, type of treatments in the next slide, but this also needs to include, and the first step should always be educating the adult with ADHD about ADHD, but also the partner of that adult about ADHD. And again, the CADDAC website has tons of resources for you to be able to do that. But you then again, as I said before, you also have to figure out how ADHD impacts that adult specifically. Both partners have to be committed to change, and the partner with ADHD has to be committed to improving their functioning through treatment, and again, a variety of treatments, but they need to take responsibility for their treatment. The non-ADHD partner is responsible for correcting their misconceptions and changing their own behavior, i.e. how they're reacting to the things happening. So they need to change their mindset about what is happening and why it's happening. So some steps to improving the relationship. You both have to accept that ADHD does impact the relationship. That's a given, okay? Hopefully you haven't waited till things are irreparable. Obviously, the sooner in a relationship this can happen, the better, but any time is better than not doing it, okay? You have to understand that ADHD is a medical disorder with impairments. It is not the adult's choice to have ADHD or for these behaviors and impairments to be there. And hopefully that will change the lens that you're viewing these behaviors and issues in, okay? Again, it's not an intentional act. So you have to try to forgive and forget the past transgression, and realize that it's not just a matter of that adult with ADHD trying harder. We try to tell, or people who don't understand ADHD try to tell children this: if you just tried harder, things would be better. No, we have to try differently, and we have to understand what's going on to be able to put in appropriate accommodations and strategies. You need to stop blaming each other and start working as a team to figure this out. And nagging and shaming, we know, doesn't work for kids, it doesn't work for adults, okay? And continue criticism is just demoralizing. So we have to put a stop to that and handle these things better. Again, treatments, medication is a possible treatment. It's a personal choice. It's not for everyone, but we do know that it can significantly assist in attention regulation, helps with forgetfulness, hyperactivity, impulsivity, and it can be a big help to emotional regulation as well. But again, it should never, ever be the only treatment put in place. So we always need ADHD medication and strategies put in place as well. Some other therapies that are backed by research, cognitive behavior therapy, especially when it is paired with medication, has research behind it that shows it can be very helpful. CBT is where we challenge the sort of negative thought process that we see in ADHD, but there's also a lot of learning about sort of the ADHD brain in there as well, and how it's functioning and why things are happening. ADHD coaching can be very helpful for specific strategies or impairments in daily functioning, very helpful with organization, planning, all kinds of things. Therapy for anger management and marriage therapy can be helpful, but only if it is done by a therapist who is also an expert in ADHD. If the therapist does not understand what's going on, it can actually make things worse. And obviously lifestyle changes that help the brain to function better, like a better diet, more balance, higher in protein, not an elimination diet, a better sleep habits, schedules, more aerobic exercise, all of these things can be helpful as well. So a couple of roadblocks that can come up to this. So first off, realize that you as the partner of the adult with ADHD, if you have not knowing what's going on, you will have been under a lot of stress, and you may have to stop for a little while, consider what's going on, do a little bit of self-care while you're learning about ADHD, take a breather, and get your stress levels down. So you've probably gone through a lot of confusion, even questioning your sanity at times. When I talk to couples with ADHD, and actually have found this even myself, sometimes you actually question your own sanity, because the ADHD brain will see things and interpret things quite differently than the non-ADHD brain. So when you're talking and remembering a discussion or a situation that happened, the two people can actually view things and remember things very, very differently. And you may have questioned yourself to say, is this me? Am I losing out? What's going on? So just be aware that that does happen sometimes, okay? You might have been under a huge amount of stress for a period of time, exhausted from carrying the whole load. There's probably been a lot of arguing and anger, in discussions for quite a while. And you've probably gotten to the point where you're questioning, will things ever change, right? So you've been on this emotional roller coaster ride. And actually, Gina Pira talks about this. And Gina Pira is an author who's done some great books on adult ADHD, and also how they impact relationships. So you may want to look into that, right? So you may need to take this time out to get your head, your stress levels down, your head kind of straightened out as you learn about ADHD, so you don't go into trying to repair the relationship very emotional and totally exhausted. So what to do when your partner is in denial? Okay. This happens frequently and it is difficult to deal with, but you've got to accept that you can't force your partner out of the denial. So what can you do, right? So again, remember I mentioned that people with ADHD have very poor awareness of how their behavior impacts others, and they may be oversensitive to criticism, right? And then you've got that argumentative behavior playing in some adults with ADHD. So if they're going to deny the label, just don't use the label for a while, okay? So, and if they may perceive that label as criticism, right? So focus on tackling specific problems and situations without labeling them as ADHD behavior or ADHD impairment, or this is an ADHD strategy, right? So, and again, you may have to get a professional involved in this as well, who will be very good at being able to term these things the right way. You may want to start on changing yourself first and how you react. We know it always takes two to develop a dysfunctional relationship. And by changing the way you react to the behavior will also change your partner's way of reacting to your reaction, right? And if your partner is still thinking that everything is just happening or there's issues because you're just a control freak, maybe you'll need to step back a bit, relinquish some of that control. It may lead to some hard lessons, obviously. Be prepared and watch. You're not going to let your family go into bankruptcy, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes the adults may need to take control or think they're taking control for a while to be able to see really how much they struggle with some things, okay? And sometimes you may need to set up an urgent situation. So really quick story. A number of years ago, for actually a few years, my husband was quite down, uninterested in doing a lot of stuff, very negative, and For a while, I had been talking to him about going to see somebody, that I thought he was dealing with depression, and it was always discounted, denied, et cetera, to the point where I got angry enough to say, okay, this is your choice to live this way. You have the choice to live being negative and uninterested in anything, but I also have the choice whether I want to live in that environment or not. Obviously, it was said a little bit more forcefully than that, but it did shock him enough. It became an urgent situation. And remember, the ADHD brain is driven by that adrenaline rush. So it became urgent in his mind. So he did go for help. And then, of course, a couple of months later said, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I don't know why I did this, why I didn't do this years ago. Which at that point I had to stop myself from banging my head against the wall. But anyway, that's a whole nother story in itself. So let's look at applying specific strategies. And I may need to go through these quickly, but remember, you've got all the points in the slides you can refer to back later, okay? Don't take ADHD symptoms personally. You know, that's easy to say. It's very hard to do, but it is something that's good to keep in the back of your mind, to keep reminding yourself. My husband will frequently say to me, you more than anybody else should know why I'm frustrated or why I'm reacting this way. At which point my reply is, I totally understand why you're frustrated. I understand why you're behaving that way, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to have an emotional response when you're yelling at me, right? So again, remind yourself, but it's difficult to do. So realize you can't control your spouse, right? So, but you can change the dynamics of the relationship by stopping the verbal attacks and the blame and the nagging, et cetera, but also the adult with ADHD, your partner has to stop using excuses and just ignoring the situation and assuming it'll get better, okay? You have to actively do something about this, okay? Positive feedback. We know this works very well for children. So positive feedback rather than negative feedback and encouragement. So when you see progress, when your partner has done something well, what you've been asking to do, even if it's small progress, make sure you encourage them. You give them positive feedback, how much it means to you, how helpful it is, et cetera. Don't wait for huge amounts of progress, right, to do this. Constant, continuous positive feedback is the best way to go. And try to remember, you know, that partner you first fell in love with, and all those traits you thought were cute back then, you know, the impulsivity, the high energy levels, et cetera, and, you know, make some time to do those enjoyable things. So, you know, try to remember those times and, you know, get back to some unstressful activities that you can enjoy together. This was an interesting rule I read about from one couple put in place, that only one crazy person was allowed in the relationship at one time. So basically this means that, you know, if you've both come home after having a really bad day, you need to both express that, but then one person has to step back and say, okay, you've got the first hour to vent, get it out of your system. I'm going to be on hold. I'm going to allow you to get it out of your system first, and then you're going to give me an opportunity, right? So there's not two people sort of ranting and raving at the same time. You also need to get a view of what's going on more analytically, right? You need to step back from those emotions and look at and what are the issues you're frequently fighting about that go on. And this may have to be on the shoulders of the adult or the non-ADHD adult, right? To be able to do this. And again, sometimes it needs professional help to be able to do this, right? But you have to be able to analyze what's going on so you can get at the underlying issues and then be able to put in the proper accommodations and strategies, okay? And if there's been a lot of issues in embarrassing social situations, discuss it openly. You may want to come up with a cue that you can give your partner who's got ADHD, who may be totally unaware of when he or she is boring, others, or dominating the conversation, or however it works out. So, a little cue of when I say, "Can you get me a drink, dear?" it means, okay, time to walk away from this. So working that out ahead of time can be very helpful. So some more general tips. You need to be careful that you do not become the parent in this relationship. It sets up a very bad dynamic. And one takes the role of the child and one of the parent. The difficulty is that it forms an unbalanced dynamic in the relationship, which is not good. Obviously, it's easy to go there because you feel that you need to handle everything, but that's not the way to do it, okay? Yes, you need to recognize your partner's limitations, but don't take on all the tasks, right? You need to sit down, figure out what you're both good at, and divide the chores work that way. So swap tasks rather than taking them all on yourself. Strive for an equal balance of labor, but be sensitive again to each other's weaknesses and strengths. If something is time sensitive, you may want to take that on yourself because people with ADHD don't have a good sense of time, or set a firm sort of deadline for the person to work to, and then have set up a way to give reminders that won't upset the person. Be open to your partner's different or unorthodox approaches to whatever it be, organization, time management, if they work. If they work, let them do it the way it works for them, okay? What works for you may not work for them. And put the issues in perspective, okay? So when you're looking at the things that keep happening, prioritize. Look at what is most important to deal with first, and then put the others on hold, because you can't deal with everything at the same time, okay? And this is a little personal tip. Tell your partner how they can take care of you, or share when you're feeling very tired, very stressed, you feel that the world is on your shoulders, and give them specific direction of how they can help. Remember, adults with ADHD are not good at picking up subtle cues. So many years ago, I find it very de-stressing to be able to read. Having a household with a husband with ADHD and 3 sons with ADHD, I knew as soon as I stuck my head out the door on a Saturday or Sunday morning, I would be immediately inundated. So I tried to get a few minutes in bed reading before I stuck my head out the door, and my husband started bringing me breakfast in bed. And surprisingly, he shared how much he enjoyed this, because he felt that it was a way for him to give back for all the times I took the load on things, and it made him feel very good. It also made me feel very good because I got some quiet time. I felt a little pampered, and you know what? We've been doing it all these years later, and it works great. So some more communication strategies. So some more communication strategies. Not being heard is the most common complaint in relationships, and it causes the most stress. And the stress level stays up there until you feel that you've been heard. So both partners have to increase their own listening skills, okay? So check back with your partner that you understand what they have said and you have heard them. It helps a great deal. And it may feel a little awkward at the beginning, but it does get better, okay? Ask for repetition if your mind wanders, and give your partner permission to say to you, oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. I was thinking of something else. Can you please repeat that? And don't give them heck for it, right? Encourage them to do that, right? Don't get angry at them for ignoring you, etc. This is a part of ADHD, right? So again, set that up as a strategy. Make time to have face-to-face talks. But, some couples have also told me that when the situation is very heated and emotional, they actually find sometimes using email or text can be helpful in communicating because it takes the emotion out of it. But be very careful that your messages aren't misinterpreted, right? And make sure that what you are telling your partner has been understood and that you're understanding what somebody's telling you. So another quick story, a couple where the husband, whenever he felt very stressed from work, found going out to a movie helped. One weekend, his wife was really busy and, he yelled going out the door, remember, I'm going to the movies, see you later. And she said, yeah, see you later. And then 2.5 hours go by, he doesn't show up. She's starting to get worried. 4.5 hours, she's like, oh, well, maybe he stayed for 2 movies, I don't know. By the time 7.5 hours go by and he strolls in and she's ready to call the cops and she explodes at him and he's totally perplexed, doesn't understand what her issue is. She says, where have you been? And he said, what do you mean where I've been? I told you I was going to the movies. There was a movie marathon. I said movies, going to the movies. I thought you knew this. So both partner was at fault because they did not pay attention to their communication to make sure the other partner understood what they were saying and that they understood what their partner was saying. So some more communication strategies. Encourage your partner with ADHD to ask questions. It helps them to stay focused. And sometimes they even have to jot down things, okay, to hold down an idea for later. Don't take it personally. Use eye contact or try to use eye contact, but do realize that some adults with ADHD have difficulty with eye contact, especially if there's a touch of autism there. But find a way to make sure you have their attention when you're speaking. And if they are over focusing on something, don't even try. My husband is a computer consultant. So when he programs, he goes into hyper focus. I can go down and have a 5-minute conversation with him, and 2 hours later, he'll swear I never said a word. So be very conscious of that, right? Again, it's not intentional, just part of ADHD. Try to use more direct, shorter sentences. If you're somebody who goes into long stories, very descriptive, realize your partner is going to lose their focus. So try to be more direct in your communication. Listen openly without judgment. So each of you needs to try to walk in the other person's shoes when they are communicating. And we know this is a problem with kids. We ask them a question about why they did something. As soon as they respond, we jump all over them with judgment, and we never really get to hear how their mind works, why they interpret things a certain way, why they reacted. So we need to learn to be quiet, let them get everything out, maybe ask a few probing questions, but keep the judgment out, okay? Allow for breaks. If one of you is getting tired, remember the adult with ADHD can only focus for so long. So you may have to have a briefer conversation and then come back to it later. And don't make assumptions to your partner's motivation. If they've given you a certain reply and you assume they just don't want to do it because they're lazy or whatever, question that, right? Okay, give them the opportunity to explain their motivation. Don't assume you know what it is. And be aware that it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. People with ADHD can be very, very sensitive to tone. And again, we know this occurs in kids as well, so it continues into adulthood. So it's not just what you say, it's how you say it. So let's look at some general organization tips. Again, I said, identify your strengths and weaknesses for both of you. Not everybody is good at everything, right? So use individual as well as family organization methods. You may want to do something as archaic as a family laminated calendar on the fridge. This helped us, but then at the same time, you may also want to use your electronic devices for individual reminders. Remember that your partner's organizational strategies may feel very strange to you and yours to them, but as long as they work, that's fine, right? Don't get them to change theirs to yours. It won't work for them. Have a specially designated area for all those things that constantly get lost, like keys, electronic devices, papers, and you may need to get a professional in to help you organize your house if one of you is not very organized, because a lot of times when things are done and organized, people with ADHD can follow that. They can learn which basket this goes in, which tray that goes in, but they can't organize it themselves. So develop routines and schedules for the family. Again, best for kids with ADHD. And let's face it, adults with ADHD have kids with ADHD. So routine schedule is good for the whole family. Use visual reminders. You know, just a list on the back of your door as you go out the door with, you know, do I have my keys? Do I have my cell phone? Do I have my lunch, et cetera, just for a quick list. All kinds of strategies around that. And you may need to declutter. Again, you may need to use a professional for this and have organizational tools put in place. Again, may need a professional, but have the tray for the unpaid bills. You know, tray for the you put in when they're paid, have a date you do it, twice a month, etc. Again, schedule, routine, strategies to keep yourself organized. And for a lot of families, for once a week family meeting, you know, could be Sunday afternoon, where you talk about all the responsibilities and events that's happening for that day, who's driving who, and while you're sitting at the table, you know, put things, the reminders in your phone there and then so they don't get forgotten. So fighting about chores, this is very, very common. You need to address workload imbalances. And again, divide chores along strengths, okay? Trade chores, however you have to do it so the balance is more equal. Okay, agree to mutually acceptable ways of doing reminders, you know, and humor is often a good way to do this. There's a story about a couple who knew the husband could use a coach, but they couldn't afford a coach. So the wife found when she was reminding her husband to do things, he would often get his back up because he took it as, you know, she was criticizing, etc., when she was reminding him. So she got into the habit of before she said something, she would say, "This is your ADHD coach speaking. Remember, you have to have this done by the end of the day." And they would have a chuckle about it because it sort of became a, you know, kind of joke between the two of them, used humor, but it took out that criticism. and he took the reminders better. Okay. Understands that some of the bigger tasks may have to be split into two people because it's just too much, but the person who is more time sensitive may have to be the closer. Okay. So also know that there are certain things that neither of you may be good at, right? So you can outsource these things. So things like bookkeeping, cleaning the house, yard work, et cetera, et cetera. There's ways to outsource, these things. And some tasks can now be automated, especially during times of COVID, but at all times, you can order groceries and you can have a list that's, there for you with all the things that you order. All you have to do is check it off and off it goes. And if one of the partners has had a heavier workload for whatever unforeseen circumstances, find ways to show your appreciation, that, you realize a little appreciation can go a long way. Now, I mentioned parenting a few times. So realize the untreated adult with ADHD will find it impossible to parent patiently and consistently unless they're diagnosed and treated, okay? Again, one of the reasons this is the very first most important step. You need to parent as a team. Believe me, kids with ADHD are great at dividing and conquering. And arguing over parenting can be hugely detrimental to not only your relationship, but the relationship between parent and child, okay? Adults, and this is a message to the adults with ADHD, but obviously if they're not on this presentation, share it with them. So think about it this way. An adult with ADHD who takes responsibility for their treatment, puts in the strategies and the accommodations and things that helps them be successful, is the best role model for a child with ADHD. Who could relate better, right? You get them, you understand their struggles. If they see you learning about your ADHD, being responsible in your treatments and putting in strategies, it's a phenomenal role model. Again, divide parenting chores by strengths like everything else. And remember to divide the fun things. Nobody wants to be the bad guy all the time, right? So you're going to have to divide discipline, as well as the fun things. Emotional outburst. Again, we talked about this, how it can be very destructive to a relationship. Know that medication can be a significant help with this for some people, but you need to have an honest, open discussion about this. Both partners need to become aware of the other partner's triggers and signals. We all have them, but you need to become aware when your partner is becoming too agitated. You need to know when to walk away. And don't expect your partner with ADHD to pick up your subtle cues. It doesn't happen. You have to be very direct in communication. And sometimes we need to call timeouts, right? Or if things get really heated, you may have to figure out a code word or a message or something that just stops things immediately. The interaction needs to be things like, sorry, I really need to go for a walk to clear my head, to cool down. And that needs to be figured out ahead of time, that this is the cue that I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm not feeling safe, this is getting too heated, we need to cool down, so the other partner does not take it that you don't want to discuss this, you're shutting them down, you just need a break. And again, professionals may need to be required for these situations. Okay, so here's a bunch of references if you're interested in finding out more information about this. So we do have about 10-15 minutes for some questions. So Fiona, I'll take those questions now.
Yep. Thank you, Heidi, for the detailed presentation. And we do have some questions. So how do we avoid ADHD blaming in relationships? So when is it a valid argument rather than being an ADHD symptom?
Yeah, so again, it's that learning about ADHD, and it's important for the non-ADHD person, even if they are frustrated beyond belief, not to get into that yelling, blame, these, well, did you take your medication today kind of comments, right? And this takes work. It's hard work, right? And again, sometimes it takes professionals to be involved in this, but it's going to take discussions when you're not in those heated arguments to figure out ways to not go there, right? To better your communication strategies, to be able to have times to discuss things you're going to be put in place and issues during times of calm. And yes, that may have to be with a third party present. Another question, Fiona?
Sorry, I just have to unmute. So the second question is, now that assessments are being done online, would it be easier to get an out-of-province assessment or receive care from more advanced provinces and access to ADHD specialists? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's an interesting issue. Obviously, if you're seeing a physician, physicians are generally covered by provincial coverage, right? Like in Ontario, it's OHIP. So if you're seeing a physician, that might be difficult. If you're seeing a psychologist where they charge through pocket, it might be easier. But if you're hoping to get some of that covered through your private insurance, I would check with my private insurance first. And you may not want to deem it as being an assessment. You may want to just say therapy from a psychologist, because some private insurance doesn't cover, quote, assessment, but it all depends on how it's worded in the invoice. And yes, we are seeing things open up more because of online assessments, and a lot of practitioners are finding a very good ways to be able to do this, through Skype and Zoom and all kinds of different ways. So it has given us better access for assessments.
Thank you. And one last question is, what if both spouses have ADHD? Any tips on advice on that?
Yeah, so a lot of the tips that I've given today, and I also do a presentation just on how ADHD impacts relationships as well, which is in the webinars. So when both partners have ADHD, yes, things can become complex. And one would think that there'd be less issues because they can understand aspects of their partner's ADHD and why their ADHD, why they're struggling with certain things. But also remember that ADHD is very individual. So one partner may have a lot of issues with certain things, and the other partner issues with something else. And, again, when both people are emotionally unregulated and they both have issues with organization, this kind of thing, it can be more challenging, not impossible, a little bit more challenging. But again, it may need a third party's intervention. But what it definitely needs is assessments and treatments for both people with ADHD. Obviously, parenting can become more of a challenge. And then it's also probably more important that you pay a lot of attention to developing parenting techniques, that work well. So again, maybe more work, again, not impossible, but realize that your ADHD may be very different from your partner's ADHD.
Okay, thank you, Heidi. And one last question we have regarding ADHD in seniors. Are there any additional considerations that are good to know as tips for people?
Yeah, so this is actually a topic that has come up more lately, and we've actually just had physicians who are willing to diagnose seniors with ADHD, because for a while they were very concerned about medication treatment, that type of thing. Any ADHD can be assessed and treated at any age. Sometimes with a senior, the physician may be a little more cautious with getting some testing for blood pressure and cardiac issues and stuff before he starts medication, he or she starts medication. But other than that, all of the same things apply. Now, obviously, the longer you have lived with ADHD, the greater chance you have put in place dysfunctional ways of dealing with your ADHD. So there may be more work required to undo that dysfunctional way of dealing with things before we can put in the proper ways. But again, the first thing always has to be learning, about your ADHD. And I've talked to some older people who've been diagnosed late in life, and they have shared that it's just been mind-blowing, right? It's just changed their entire life, their way of thinking about things, and functioning. So again, it can be treated, assessed and treated at any age.
Thank you, Heidi. And if there are no more questions, then we will end the session here. Thank you for joining us today. And our next session will be at 11 a.m. presented by Heidi again on what you need to know when advocating for your child in the school system. So with that said, we'll end the session here, and we'll see you in about 20 minutes. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks for joining us today.